Ruby Chen pushed through the glass door of the Copper Kettle diner at 5:30 in the morning, the small bell above announcing her arrival with its familiar chime. The scent of fresh coffee and bacon grease welcomed her like an old friend. She tied her apron around her waist and grabbed her order pad from behind the counter, ready for another long day. "Morning, sweetheart," Stella Morrison called from the kitchen window. The 60-year-old waitress had been working at the diner for 30 years and knew every regular by name, order, and life story. "Your favorite customer will be here in 10 minutes. Ruby smiled despite her exhaustion. She had been working double shifts for the past 8 months, trying to save enough money to help her younger sister Grace finish college. The Copper Kettle paid decent wages, and the tips were reliable, especially from the breakfast crowd. "Let me guess," Ruby said, pouring herself a quick cup of coffee. "Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and a side of fruit." "Every single morning for the past 3 years," Stella laughed. "That man is more punctual than my alarm clock." Vernon Hayes arrived at exactly 5:45, just as the first rays of sunlight broke through the city skyline. He was an unremarkable man in his late 50s, with graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and clothes that looked comfortable rather than expensive. He always sat in the same booth by the window, always brought a newspaper, and always left a $20 bill for a $15 meal. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," Ruby greeted him warmly, already reaching for the coffee pot. "The usual today?" "Please, Ruby." "And how is Grace doing with her studies?" Vernon asked, settling into his seat. Ruby felt a warmth spread through her chest. Most customers never bothered to remember her name, let alone ask about her family. Vernon had been coming to the diner since before she started working there, and over the months, their brief morning conversations had become the highlight of her day. "She has finals next week. Organic chemistry is giving her trouble, but she's determined," Ruby replied, filling his mug with steaming coffee. "I keep telling her that doctor thing runs in the family. Our grandmother was a nurse." "Determination is worth more than natural talent," Vernon said, unfolding his newspaper. "She's lucky to have a sister like you." Ruby hurried back to the kitchen to place his order, her cheeks slightly flushed from the compliment. James Park, the day manager, was already prepping for the morning rush, his movements efficient and practiced. "Table 6 needs a refill, Ruby," James called out without looking up from the grill. "And the couple in booth 3 wants to see a dessert menu at 6 in the morning. I'll never understand people." The morning rush hit like a tidal wave, construction workers grabbing breakfast. Before their shifts, nurses finishing night rotations, taxi drivers fueling up for long days ahead. Ruby moved between tables with practiced grace, balancing plates, refilling coffee cups, and remembering orders without writing them down. Through it all, Vernon sat quietly in his corner booth, reading his newspaper and occasionally glancing out the window at the waking city. He never complained when his coffee went cold, never flagged her down impatiently, never made her feel rushed even when the diner was packed. Around 8 o'clock, when the crowd began to thin, Ruby finally had a moment to breathe. She leaned against the counter, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension building there. "You okay, honey?" Stella asked, wiping down the coffee maker. "You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." "I'm fine," Ruby assured her, though the exhaustion in her voice betrayed her words. "Just need to make it through 3 more months. Once Grace graduates, I can finally slow down." Stella shook her head knowingly. "That sister of yours better appreciate what you're doing for her." "She does. She wants to pay me back once she becomes a doctor, but I keep telling her that's not how family works," Ruby said, glancing over at Vernon's booth. He was preparing to leave, folding his newspaper neatly and placing his usual $20 bill under his coffee cup. As he stood to go, Vernon caught Ruby's eye and gave her a small wave. She waved back, already moving to clear his table. When she picked up the $20 bill, she found another folded bill underneath it. $100. Ruby's heart raced as she unfolded the crisp bill, looking around to see if Vernon was still nearby. But he had already disappeared through the door, the little bell marking his departure. "Stella, look at this," Ruby whispered urgently, showing her coworker the money. Stella's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be. That's some tip." "It's too much. I need to give it back," Ruby said, moving toward the door. "Sugar, that man has been coming here for years. If he wanted to leave you that kind of tip, he meant it," Stella said gently, placing a hand on Ruby's arm. "Maybe he knows you're working hard for something important." Ruby stood at the window, watching Vernon's figure disappear down the street. He walked with a slight limp, his hands in his pockets, looking like any other person heading to work on a Thursday morning. Nothing about him suggested wealth or extravagance. He was just a kind, quiet man who appreciated good service and hot coffee. She carefully tucked the $100 bill into her apron pocket, making a mental note to thank him properly the next morning. Little did she know that Vernon Hayes was far more than he appeared, and this generous tip was merely a glimpse of a much bigger story waiting to unfold. Vernon Hayes walked 3 blocks from the Copper Kettle before his driver pulled up in a sleek black sedan. The transition from humble diner patron to corporate executive happened in the space of a car door closing. Inside the vehicle, Philip Garrett, his attorney of 20 years, was already reviewing documents on a tablet. "Good morning, Vernon," Philip said without looking up. "The board meeting has been moved to 9 o'clock. They want to discuss the Hampton acquisition before the press release." Vernon settled into the leather seat and accepted the briefcase. His driver handed him. "Let them wait 5 minutes. I haven't finished my coffee ritual yet." Philip finally glanced up, a knowing smile on his face. "You mean your morning visit to that diner? Vernon, you own half the commercial real estate in this city. Why do you insist on eating breakfast in a place that probably violates 3 health codes? The Copper Kettle is perfectly clean and you know it," Vernon replied, his voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. "Besides, I happen to enjoy the coffee there." "You enjoy watching that waitress work herself to exhaustion," Philip corrected. "What is it now, 8 months of double shifts?" Vernon looked out the window, watching the city pass by in a blur of glass and steel. "Ruby reminds me of someone I used to be. Determined, hard-working, willing to sacrifice everything for family. When I was her age, I was washing dishes in a kitchen not much different from that diner." Philip had heard this story before, but he listened patiently. Vernon Hayes had built his empire from absolutely nothing, starting with a single food truck 40 years ago and expanding into one of the largest hospitality and real estate conglomerates in the country. The Copper Kettle was actually one of 73 diners, restaurants, and cafes he owned throughout the city, though most of his employees had no idea who really signed their paychecks. "Helen has been asking about your plans for the Copper Kettle," Philip said carefully. "The property value has increased substantially. Several developers have expressed interest in the location." "Tell Helen that the Copper Kettle stays exactly as it is," Vernon said firmly. "That diner has been serving the community for 45 years. Some things are worth more than their market value." The sedan pulled up to a gleaming tower of glass and chrome in the financial district. Hayes Corporation occupied 15 floors, and Vernon's office sat at the very top, offering a panoramic view of the entire city. As he stepped into the building, the transformation was complete. The quiet, unassuming diner regular became the commanding presence that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and built an empire. Helen Torres, his executive assistant, met him at the elevator with her usual efficiency. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s who had been with Vernon for a decade and could anticipate his needs before he voiced them. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Your 9 o'clock has arrived early. The Hampton representatives are eager to finalize terms," Helen said, falling into step beside him as they walked toward his office. "Also, the Foundation Board needs your approval on 3 new scholarship applications." Vernon paused at that last item. "Send me the applications directly. I want To review them personally? Helen made a note on her tablet but couldn't hide her curiosity. Sir, if I may ask, why do you always insist on reviewing the scholarship applications yourself? We have an entire department for that. Because I remember what it feels like to need help and have no one offer it, Vernon said simply. Every application represents someone's dreams, Helen. The least I can do is give them my personal attention. The board meeting went smoothly. Vernon had a gift for reading people and situations, a skill honed from years of observing human nature from behind diner counters and kitchen doors. The Hampton acquisition would add 12 properties to his portfolio and create jobs for over 200 people. It was good business and good for the community. After the meeting, Vernon returned to his office and pulled up a file on his computer. It was marked Ruby Chen, Personal Research. Inside were details he had discreetly gathered over the past months. Ruby was 28, had been working at the Copper Kettle for 2 years, and before that had held 3 other service jobs simultaneously. Her sister Grace was in her final year of pre-medical studies at the State University, maintaining a strong grade point average despite working part-time at the campus library. Their parents had passed away in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving Ruby as Grace's sole guardian. She had dropped out of her own college program to support her sister, putting Grace's education above her own dreams. The sisters lived in a modest apartment in a safe but unremarkable neighborhood, and Ruby's bank statements showed that nearly every penny she earned went toward Grace's tuition and living expenses. Vernon leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He saw himself in Ruby's story so clearly, it was almost painful. At her age, he had been supporting his 3 younger siblings after their father abandoned the family and their mother fell ill. He had worked every job imaginable, sacrificing his own aspirations to ensure his siblings had opportunities he never did. "Philip," Vernon said into his intercom, "come to my office, please." The attorney arrived within minutes, already sensing that something significant was about to happen. Vernon had that particular look in his eyes, the one that appeared when he was about to make a decision that others might call impractical, but he considered essential. "I want to establish a new scholarship," Vernon said. "Full tuition, living expenses, and a stipend for books and supplies. The recipient should be someone who has sacrificed their own education to support a family member, someone who deserves a second chance." Philip nodded slowly, already making mental notes. "This is about Ruby Chen." "This is about doing what's right," Vernon corrected. "I've spent 40 years building wealth, Philip. What good is any of it if I can't help someone who reminds me why I started this journey in the first place?" "And are you planning to tell her who you really are?" Philip asked. Vernon was quiet for a long moment, watching the city sprawl below his window. Somewhere out there, Ruby was probably starting her evening shift at the Copper Kettle, her feet already aching, her smile still genuine despite her exhaustion. "Not yet," Vernon finally said. "First, I want to make sure everything is in place. Then we'll see how the story unfolds." 3 weeks had passed since Vernon had set his plan in motion, and Ruby Chen was beginning to think her life had taken a turn into some kind of strange dream. It started with a letter that arrived at her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, official and intimidating with its heavy cream-colored paper and embossed letterhead. "Grace, come look at this," Ruby called to her sister, who was studying at their small kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and notes. Grace looked up, pushing her dark hair behind her ears. "What is it?" "It's from something called the Hayes Foundation," Ruby said, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. "They're offering me a full scholarship to return to college. Everything covered: tuition, books, living expenses, even a monthly stipend." Grace jumped up from her chair, rushing over to read the letter over Ruby's shoulder. "This is incredible, but why you? How did they even know about you?" Ruby read through the letter again, searching for answers. The scholarship was specifically designed for individuals who had sacrificed their own education to support family members. The application process had apparently been waived in her case based on a recommendation from an anonymous donor who had observed her dedication and work ethic. "I don't understand," Ruby whispered. "I never applied for anything like this." Over the following days, Ruby tried to research the Hayes Foundation, but information was surprisingly scarce. It existed, certainly, and had a legitimate history of providing scholarships and community support, but the foundation kept a remarkably low profile. Every attempt to contact them directly led to polite but vague responses from assistants who couldn't provide details about her mysterious benefactor. Throughout it all, Vernon continued his morning routine at the Copper Kettle, arriving at 5:45 with his newspaper, ordering his usual breakfast, and engaging Ruby in brief but warm conversations. She wanted to tell him about the scholarship, about this miraculous turn her life had taken, but something held her back. Perhaps it was the surreal nature of it all, or perhaps she simply enjoyed having someone in her life who knew her as just Ruby, the waitress who worked hard and cared about her family. On a crisp Friday morning, exactly 1 month after Vernon had initiated his plan, everything changed. Ruby was refilling coffee cups during the morning rush when Stella grabbed her arm with unusual urgency. "Ruby, honey, you need to see this." Stella thrust her phone toward Ruby, displaying a news article with a photograph that made Ruby's heart stop. The headline read, "Local business mogul Vernon Hayes announces expansion of community investment programs." But it was the photograph that captured Ruby's attention, a professional portrait of a man in an expensive suit, standing confidently in a corporate office. It was her regular customer, her Mr. Hayes who ate eggs and toast every morning. "That can't be right," Ruby stammered, looking from the phone to Vernon's usual booth where he sat reading his newspaper, oblivious to her discovery. "That's just Mr. Hayes. He's a regular customer." Stella laughed, a sound mixed with disbelief and admiration. "Sugar, that man owns this diner. He owns about 70 other restaurants in this city. Vernon Hayes is worth somewhere north of $3 billion. Ruby felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the counter for support, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had with Vernon over the past months. The generous tips suddenly made sense. The personal questions about Grace's education, the way he always seemed genuinely interested in her struggles and dreams. "The Hayes Foundation," Ruby said aloud, the pieces clicking together. "He's the anonymous donor." Before Stella could respond, the door to the diner opened, and 2 people in business attire entered. Ruby recognized one of them from the news article, a woman identified as Helen Torres, Vernon's executive assistant. The other was an older man carrying a briefcase. Helen approached the counter with a professional smile. "Excuse me, we're looking for Ruby Chen." Ruby raised her hand weakly, still processing the revelation. "That's me? Miss Chen, my name is Helen Torres, and this is Philip Garrett. We work with Vernon Hayes. Would you have a moment to speak with us?" Ruby glanced at Vernon's booth. He had set down his newspaper and was watching the scene unfold with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it nervousness? Hope? She untied her apron with shaking hands and nodded. James emerged from the kitchen, taking in the unusual situation. "Ruby, take your break. Stella and I can handle the floor." Helen led Ruby to a booth at the far end of the diner, away from the breakfast crowd. Philip opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. But before they could begin their explanation, Ruby held up her hand. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would someone like Mr. Hayes care about someone like me?" Vernon stood from his booth and walked over, moving slowly as if giving Ruby time to process his approach. He slid into the seat across from her, and for the first time she noticed details she had missed before. The quality of his watch, the subtle tailoring of his clothes, the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "May I tell you a story, Ruby?" Vernon asked gently. Ruby nodded, unable to find words. 43 years ago I was washing. Dishes in a diner not much different from this one. My father had left, my mother was sick, and I had 3 younger siblings depending on me. I dropped out of college after 1 semester because I couldn't afford to be both a student and a provider, Vernon began, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. I worked every shift I could find. I saved every penny. I sacrificed every dream I had for myself so my siblings could have better lives. Ruby felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. The parallel was unmistakable. One day, a customer at that diner saw how hard I was working. He was a successful businessman who had built his fortune from nothing, and he saw something of himself in me. He offered me a job, then a partnership, then helped me start my first business, Vernon continued. He changed my life, Ruby, not with charity, but with opportunity. He gave me a chance to build something while still supporting my family. So this is you paying it forward, Ruby said softly. This is me recognizing someone with the same determination, the same heart, the same willingness to sacrifice for the people she loves, Vernon corrected. You remind me that success means nothing if we don't use it to lift others up. Philip cleared his throat gently. Miss Chen, the scholarship is real, and it's yours if you want it. But Mr. Hayes has another proposition. He'd like to offer you a position in the Hayes Corporation Management Training Program. You would work part-time while completing your degree with a salary that would more than cover your current expenses and allow your sister to focus entirely on her studies. Ruby looked at Vernon, searching his familiar face for any sign of pity or condescension. She found only respect and genuine kindness. I don't want you to feel obligated, Vernon said quickly. The scholarship stands regardless of whether you accept the job offer, but I believe you have talents that extend far beyond serving coffee, as excellent as you are at it. I'd like to give you the same kind of chance someone once gave me. Stella appeared at the table with a fresh pot of coffee, her eyes suspiciously bright. For what it's worth, honey, I think you should listen to the man. He knows talent when he sees it. Ruby laughed through her tears, accepting the coffee cup Stella pressed into her hands. She thought about Grace, who could finally stop worrying, about money and focus on becoming the doctor she dreamed of being. She thought about herself, about the college degree she had abandoned, about dreams she had carefully packed away in order to be practical and responsible. Can I ask you one thing? Ruby said to Vernon. Anything. Why did you keep coming here every morning? Why didn't you just have your assistant contact me? Why maintain the routine? Vernon smiled, the same warm smile she had seen hundreds of times across a diner booth. Because that hour each morning being just another customer in a good diner, talking to someone who treats me like a regular person instead of a bank account, that's the most honest part of my day. You never knew who I was, Ruby, so I got to see who you really are. And what I saw was someone worth investing in. Ruby set down her coffee cup and extended her hand across the table. Mr. Hayes, I accept your offer, both of them, but on one condition. Vernon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What's that? You still have to come here for breakfast. Same time, same order, same booth. Because I think we both need that one honest hour in our day. Vernon laughed and shook her hand firmly. Deal. Though I suppose you'll need to find someone else to serve me coffee once you start your new position. I'll train them personally, Ruby promised. Nobody walks away from this booth without a full cup and a kind word. That's the rule. As the morning sun streamed through the diner windows, Ruby looked around at the familiar space that had been her world for so long. Soon it would be just one part of a much larger life, but she would never forget the lessons she learned here about hard work, kindness, and the quiet dignity of service. Vernon returned to his usual booth to finish his now cold coffee, and Ruby stood to return to work for what would be one of her last shifts as a full-time waitress. Before she tied her apron back on, she caught Stella watching her with pride. What are you grinning about? Ruby asked. Just thinking that sometimes. The universe gets it right, Stella said. Sometimes the person who deserves a miracle actually gets one. Ruby glanced back at Vernon, who had returned to his newspaper as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. She thought about all the mornings he had sat quietly in his corner booth, watching, waiting, and planning to change her life. She thought about the kind of person who possessed enormous wealth and power, but chose to spend his mornings in a modest diner, looking for people worth believing in. "You know what the best part is?" Ruby said to Stella. "What's that, honey?" He never knew that serving him coffee every morning was already the best part of my day. He gave me hope before I even knew who he was. Stella squeezed Ruby's hand. "That's because real kindness doesn't need recognition, sugar. It just needs a chance to change someone's life." Ruby picked up the coffee pot and headed back to the floor, ready to finish her shift with a heart full of gratitude and a future full of possibility. In a city of millions, in a modest diner serving breakfast to the morning crowd, two lives had intersected in the most unlikely way. And in that intersection, both had found exactly what they needed. Vernon had rediscovered his purpose, and Ruby had discovered that miracles sometimes wear wire-rimmed glasses and order eggs over easy. The little bell above the door chimed as new customers entered, and Ruby greeted them with her warmest smile. Some endings, she realized, were really just the beginning of something better. The end.